the question. In 24, the DOJ's research arm issued a report on domestic terrorism stating that the number of far-right attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violence extremists. The DOJ published their report, and after the president made those comments, the DOJ took the report down. And I sent you a letter asking you a simple question. Why did the Justice Department remove the data that shows right-wing extremists have killed more innocent people than left-wing extremists?
This may look like another partisan exchange in a routine oversight hearing, but it's actually a confrontation over who controls the facts inside the federal government. What's really being tested here is whether law enforcement data remains independent when it becomes politically inconvenient. This raises broader questions about transparency, institutional credibility, and the boundary between executive influence and departmental autonomy. In this video, we'll break down how a single line of questioning exposes deeper tensions between political messaging and the integrity of federal research.
The good gentleman yields back. We turn to the good lady from California, Congresswoman Kamlager-Dove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Attorney General, for being here today. I want to talk with you about an issue on which there is broad bipartisan agreement, the importance of ensuring trust between the American public and those government officials who wield powerful law enforcement responsibilities. So, Attorney General, would you agree that it is important for law enforcement leaders to be honest?
Of course, as well as members of Congress.
Thank you. And would you include yourself as a law enforcement leader?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You know, President Trump has also, he has referred to himself as the chief law enforcement officer of this country. So do you believe that President Trump is honest?
He is the commander-in-chief of the United States of America, and not only is he keeping this country safe, he is keeping this world safe.
It's a simple question,
which you didn't answer. He is the commander-in-chief.
Last June, Minnesota lawmaker Melissa Hortman, her husband Mark, and their dog were brutally murdered in their home. And your USA's office in Minnesota investigated this crime and obtained a 6-count indictment of the murder suspect, stating that he had intent to kill, injure, harass, and intimidate Minnesota legislators. And I have the copy right here. I read through it. Yet a few weeks ago, President Trump suggested publicly that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was behind these murders, posting on his Truth Social account a video raising this conspiracy theory. And it wasn't true. And you know it wasn't true, or else you would not have brought an indictment against the subject. Do you know what else Trump has said? He has said he has cut gas prices by 1,400%. False. That he won the 2020 election.
Actually, gas is down to $1.99 a gallon, thanks to
That he
President
didn't
Trump.
know Epstein.
Maybe $5 in California.
It's my time, Mr. Chair. That he sent water to LA during the wildfires. False. That Governor Westmore of Maryland called him the greatest president of his lifetime. False. So many tales, too many to keep up. But I want to go back to what he said about Tim Walz. Do you agree that President Trump undermined public trust in law enforcement by suggesting that Governor Walz was involved in the Hortman murders?
I am not familiar with that statement.
Well, that is a disappointing response, and it is also why your office and Donald Trump have zero credibility, because I know, and you know, it was a right-wing extremist who murdered the Hortmans. And you and the president are being dishonest with the American people. Last fall, after the horrific shooting of Charlie Kirk, President Trump was asked if there were extremists on both the left and the right. And his exact words were, "I'll tell you something that's going to get me in trouble, but I couldn't care less. The radicals on the right oftentimes are radical because they don't want to see crime. The radicals on the left are the problem, and they're vicious, and they're horrible, and they're politically savvy." Do you agree with this statement? You're taking too long, Madam Attorney General, but you know the answer because your own department has addressed the question. In 24, the DOJ's research arm issued a report on domestic terrorism stating that the number of far-right attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violence extremists. The DOJ published their report, and after the president made those comments, the DOJ took the report down. And I sent you a letter asking you a simple question. Why did the Justice Department remove the data that shows right-wing extremists have killed more innocent people than left-wing extremists?
Did you refer to immigration enforcement as domestic terrorism?
You should answer my question.
Yes.
You're on my time, but you won't. And what I am asking you to do is put the report back. Restore the data. Stop scrubbing important data from your website. Stop taking down reports that you know the American people need to know about. There are violent, dangerous people out here with real threats, and the dishonesty from your agency comes from the covering up of these threats that could hurt American people and put our lives at rest. Do better. And with that, I yield back, Mr.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman.
In that charged exchange, the tension was unmistakable. Congresswoman Sidney Kamlager-Dove leaned forward and asked a question so simple it cut through the noise of the hearing room. Do you believe that President Trump is honest? It was not a policy debate. It was not a discussion about budgets or procedure. It was a question about character, about truth, about the foundation upon which public trust is built. Attorney General Pam Bondi did not hesitate to affirm her position. She described the president as the commander-in-chief, as someone keeping the country, and even the world, safe. But the simplicity of the question lingered in the air. Because when a lawmaker asks the nation's top law enforcement official to define honesty at the highest level of power, the moment becomes larger than the two individuals speaking. It becomes a test of the system itself. Kamlager-Dove framed the issue deliberately. She began with a premise that few in either party would openly reject. Trust between the American public and those who wield law enforcement authority is essential. Without trust, the rule of law weakens. Without confidence in honesty, every indictment, every prosecution, every official statement becomes suspect in the eyes of the people. Then she pivoted. She referenced the tragic killing of Minnesota lawmaker Melissa Hortman, her husband Mark, and their dog, a devastating crime investigated by federal authorities. An indictment was obtained. A suspect was charged. Yet, according to Kamlager-Dove, public statements by the president suggested a different narrative. One implicating Minnesota Governor Tim Walz in a conspiracy theory that contradicted the Justice Department's own findings. That contrast was the core of her argument. If the Department of Justice formally indicts a suspect based on evidence, but political rhetoric points elsewhere, what does that do to public confidence? If the executive branch speaks in one voice while its investigative arm acts in another, what message does that send about coherence, accountability, and truth? Bondi responded that she was not familiar with the statement in question. In Washington, that phrase carries weight. It can be procedural, it can be cautious, but in moments like this, it can also sound like distance. A refusal to engage directly with the implication being raised. And so the exchange moved beyond one incident. Kamlager-Dove cited additional statements she described as inaccurate, claims about gas prices, about past elections, about disaster responses, about endorsements. Each example was not merely about fact-checking. It was about a broader narrative, whether repetition of disputed claims erodes the integrity of leadership. The Congresswoman then raised another issue. Comments by the president following the shooting of political activist Charlie Kirk. She quoted him contrasting extremists on the right and the left, framing one side as reacting to crime and the other as vicious. She then referenced a Department of Justice report from 2024 indicating that far-right attacks outpaced other forms of domestic extremist violence. According to her, that report was later removed from the department's website. She pressed Bondi on why such data would be taken down. She demanded its restoration. She accused the agency of scrubbing information the public needs to know about. At that point, the hearing room became more than a venue for partisan disagreement. It became a window into a deeper national tension, how data, rhetoric, and political allegiance intersect in shaping public perception. Government institutions do not function on force alone. They function on legitimacy, on the belief that facts are presented consistently, that reports are not selectively highlighted or buried depending on political convenience, that law enforcement is guided by evidence, not narrative. Kamlager-Dove's repeated insistence, stop scrubbing important data, restore the data, was framed as a plea for transparency. Bondi's restraint, her refusal to concede the premise, reflected another reality of Washington: loyalty, alignment, and the careful calibration of public responses. This is not merely about one president or one attorney general. It is about the fragile architecture of trust that holds a republic together. When leaders speak, citizens listen. When they contradict official findings, confusion grows. When reports disappear from websites, suspicion follows. In the end, the hearing did not resolve the question of honesty. It did not produce a definitive answer about intent or motive. But it illuminated something deeper: the stakes of credibility in an era where information moves faster than institutions can respond. Honesty in leadership is not a rhetorical flourish. It is a stabilizing force. Without it, every crisis becomes amplified. Every tragedy becomes politicized. Every fact becomes contested territory. The American system was designed with friction, checks and balances, oversight, heated hearings like this one. But that friction only strengthens democracy when it is anchored in a shared commitment to truth. Tonight's exchange reminded us that words from the highest offices carry weight far beyond the hearing room. They shape confidence in justice. They influence how citizens interpret investigations. They define whether law enforcement is seen as impartial or partisan. And so the responsibility falls not just on those elected or appointed, but on all of us: to demand clarity, to value transparency, and to hold power accountable without surrendering to cynicism. Because trust, once fractured, is not easily restored. And in a republic, trust is everything. If you believe these moments matter, if you believe accountability, oversight, and transparency deserve careful scrutiny, then stay engaged, stay informed, and subscribe to Liberty Report USA as we continue to examine the decisions, the statements, and the truths that shape our nation.